Very good.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Hershey's Mill Nature Group. I'm pleased this afternoon to introduce to you Dr. Paul Lysko. Paul has had at least a 40-year experience as a research scientist in government, academia, and industry. Most recently worked with GlaxoSmithKline and retired there after serving for 20 plus years as Director of Molecular Discovery Research. He also is retired from the Navy as a Navy captain after serving 20 years as a Medical Service Corps officer in the Navy Reserve, and specializing in chemical and biological warfare defense. Perhaps we know him better for his work with Longwood Gardens. He's been there for as a volunteer for 8 years plus, and as such has also served as their beekeeper since 2020. Paul has been very active as a beekeeper with the Chester County Beekeepers Association, where he's been a member for more than 7 years, and has been involved in the governance of that group, having served as vice president of the club for the past several years. He also is an owner and the sole proprietor of his own aviary called, or not aviary, apiary called Hilltop Apiary, which the business sells Hilltop Hives, or goes under the name of Hilltop Hives, and sells honey, beeswax, and other bee-related items. Paul is going to give us a tour of the hive, give us a sense of what goes on in and around those interesting white boxes we see from time to time, stacked or horizontally placed. So Paul, it's been a pleasure to have you with us, and we look forward to your message. Paul, you'll have to unmute yourself.
There we go. Thank you very much, Wilbur, for that swell introduction. My mother would be very proud. And Christine, thank you for inviting me. I noticed that the Hershey Mill Nature Group, the acronym came out to be HMNG, which if you phonetically pronounce it is humming. So you people are humming, and I'm certain that it's because you have a lot of interest in humming bees and perhaps humming birds. But I thought that was fun. So I'm going to just talk about what it's like to be a beekeeper. I'll go over a little nomenclature. I'll kind of like take you through the lives of the bees and show you my operation. And so maybe we'll pique your interest. I understand you're going to hold questions till the end, but if there's any burning question that needs to be addressed in the middle, feel free to interrupt. Christine, you can monitor that. Okay. And I'll be happy to take any questions. And I guess I'll go for about an hour or so. One thing you'll learn about beekeepers is they have no off button. So I'll try to limit myself. All right, so with that, we'll just get started here. All right, so here we have a, let me move the people up here where I want the gallery. All right, so a tour of the hive through the seasons. And as Wilbur said, I'm the owner of Hilltop Apiary. I do business as Hilltop Hives, and that's my logo. I like the alliteration, so I can say Hilltop Hives Honey. All natural, unfiltered, and it's great stuff. I'm also the vice president of the Chester County Beekeepers Association. Here's a picture of me at the club apiary. The Chester County Beekeepers Association has this apiary on Cheslin Preserve property in Coatesville. It's right off of Brandywine River Road. And we have a little corralled fence area, and we have a lot of different hives there, small hives, big hives. We have queen rearing. I ran the queen rearing program in 2016. And this is me after a typical day of working in the queen rearing, soaking sweat. So you have to be in good shape to be a beekeeper, because it's a lot of work. And some of those big boxes there can weigh 60 pounds if it's full of honey. I don't usually wear a bee suit until I get stung. Maybe I'm not the safest person, but I usually wear this big floppy hat that keeps them off of my head. And I use the smoker quite a bit. The smoker controls the bees. So this is...
Did you say queen rearing?
Rearing.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Queen rearing. So you can take some small larvae. I'll show you pictures of small larvae, and you can take them out of a frame and put them into a little cup. And you trick the bees. After you get about 15 or 20 of these little cups full of one-day-old larvae in a little pool of royal jelly, you can introduce them to a hive that has been tricked to believe they have no queen. All you need to do is put a metal plate in there and separate the queen from the rest of the colony. The rest of the colony that can't smell the queen, because bees do everything by pheromones, scent. If they can't smell the queen, they'll be in a panic, and they'll run across these one-day-old larvae all hanging there in a cluster, and they'll go, God, we have to make queens out of all of these. So they'll make 20 queens.
Wow.
And the beekeeper does this to sell extra queens, to perpetuate the genetics of that particular line of bees. And we offer that as a club activity, and we, every year make, and it's called grafting, and there are grafting tools to scoop the larva out. So every year we have maybe a couple different apiaries doing this, participating, and we have hundreds of queens available to our members, because every now and then a queen will go missing, or you'll squish her in the hive and you need a replacement right away. If you want the hive to do it, it'll take another month. But if you want to continue on production, you can get a queen. So you can sell queens, and some really high-priced queens go in for the hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, they have. Mm-hmm.
But a common queen, $30.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome. So these are my hives. You can see they have different sizes and different colors. They're not too gaudy, but my wife wants to make them more red or yellow. But this is the white hive. It's mostly beige here. This is the new hive, which is new. This is the green hive, which has a little green in it. And this is a cypress hive. It has no paint. It's just cypress wood. These other wooden boxes have all been preserved in beeswax and other kinds of wax. They've been boiled in it for like 15 minutes. The wax impregnates the wood and makes them virtually maintenance-free for 20 years. So the big boxes, just a little nomenclature here, the big boxes are called deeps. That they hold a deep frame, and this size deep holds 10 frames across its width. The smaller boxes are called supers, and that's where the honey is produced, in a super. Now, supers are not usually found on the bottom, because this is November. So this is November 2020. So really your beekeeping year starts in the fall, because if you don't take care to make sure that the hives are ready for winter, they won't make it. So in order to get the hives ready for winter, you have to feed the bees to make sure that each of these big hives weighs at least 100 pounds going into winter. That means they have a lot of honey reserves. So one thing I like to do is put a super full of shallow super honey down here. So the bees will eat that first, and then they'll move up into this box. They'll eat that honey, and then they'll move up into this box because they maintain 74 degrees or 75 degrees within the hive all throughout the winter. And then in the spring, when they start to raise brood, they jack it up to 95 degrees just by body heat. So they need plenty of fuel. And in this area, 100 pounds is the minimum for overwintering a hive. The small hives are called nucleus hives. They're half the size of a deep. So there are 5 frames that fit into here. And this is in a double deep configuration. And this is an empty box up here, which I can put in socks or blankets as moisture control. And I can also feed the bees in the winter. Hidden underneath this outer cover is an inner cover and a spacer where I've also put in blankets and socks to absorb excess moisture. The hives are ventilated quite a bit. In addition to the bottom entrance, there are 3/4 inch holes drilled in here for good ventilation. So more hives die of lack of ventilation than die of cold. You can also tell it's November because I have mouse guard installed. So this is normally open down below here, but this mouse guard is only a 1/4 inch hole, and the mice can't get in. If mice do get in, they can make a mess of a hive. So we want to keep the mice out, the bees in. We want to keep them fat and happy through the winter. And what else do we want? We want to treat for the Varroa mite. So the mite is a very bad pest. And if you don't control the Varroa mite, nothing else you do matters. So 2 important things going into fall. Make sure they're up to weight and make sure the mite is controlled. And this is what the hives look like during the winter. This is February in 2021. I've wrapped them in tar paper as a barrier to winds. So sometimes people erect a windscreen. I think I do enough with the fence row here. And there's also a fence row in the front. So they're kind of like in a corner of the property and they're protected from the winds. And they're in a line because they protect each other somewhat. And the tar paper really helps. When the bees find a warm day in the winter, they will come out of the woodenware and they'll hang out just underneath the tar paper, get nice and warm, and then they can go out and take their cleansing flights if they need to relieve themselves after a couple of months. So this is what was referred to as bees in the snow. So winter attrition is normal. Hundreds of bees die, if not thousands of bees. And they come out on a nice warm day to cleanse themselves, have a little poop out there. And sometimes they get disoriented, land in the snow, and then they get too cold to fly back in. And winter bees are important because they're produced in the fall. And they have to live 5 or 6 months in the hive. So they have to be in good shape. So there has to be a lot of nutrition in the fall to make the queen produce winter bees that will live for 5 or 6 months. Because summer bees only live 1 month. They just burn themselves out, getting honey back and forth. Their wings get frayed. They really get beat up, and they die quickly. So in the spring, this is what you see in the brood frames. This is not the queen. This is a nurse bee. So the nurse bees really run the colony. And a colony is known as a superorganism. There's not really any one bee in charge. You might think the queen is in charge, but she's not. She's just an egg-laying machine. And it's really the nurse bees that decide if the queen is too old and needs to be replaced. The nurse bees decide if these larvae are going to live by feeding them royal jelly. So these larvae are sitting in a puddle of royal jelly that are secreted from the glands, the mouth glands of the nurse bees. Here you can see the queen has made a mistake and laid 2 eggs in this cell. Usually she's pretty good, only laying a single egg in the cell. The egg is laid in an upright position, and after about 3 to 4 days, it falls over flat, and then it hatches. This is a 1-day-old larva. This one is probably 2 days. This is probably 3 days, and you see they get bigger and bigger. And up here we have big fat grubs. So this is getting really well along in development, and eventually they'll get capped over. This is the queen. Sorry, this is my one photo that's out of focus. But this is a queen, so you can see she's quite a bit bigger than a worker bee. All the worker bees are females. The queen is obviously a female. She has a very elongated abdomen where she holds all those eggs. So she contains hundreds of thousands of eggs that she obtains on her mating. She has 1 or 2 or 4, 3 or 4 mating flights. She'll mate with 10 to 20 drones, and then she'll come back to the hive and live out her life in the hive. In order to make her easy to find, I put a little mark of paint on her. And beekeepers traditionally use 5 colors of paint. So every 5 years, there's a switch to another 5. Last year it was blue. This year it'll be white. There's also yellow and green and red. So this is a typical scene in a brood honeycomb that has a lot of larvae developing just before getting capped. So these are all larvae that are old enough to get capped. So the nurse bees take care of all of the brood, and they feed them royal jelly. If they want to make an exclusively a queen, they will feed that larva. They will select the larva, and people would really like to know how they select the best ones for queens. But we think they make the best ones. They will feed the larva exclusively royal jelly, and that will develop into a queen within 16 days. If they make a worker, the worker's life or development time will be 21 days. And if they want a drone, the drone takes 24 days. So this is a drone up here. And I think I have another drone over here. There's another drone. So the drone is bigger than a worker bee. It's a male. It only has 1 set of chromosomes because it comes from an unfertilized egg. The worker bee comes from a fertilized egg. And the drone has no stinger. And they're freeloaders. They just go out in the hive. They eat a lot of honey. And every afternoon in the summertime or the spring and summertime, every afternoon they go out into a crowd with a bunch of other drones, and they go to a drone congregation area. It's like a biker bar. They hang out looking for virgin queens to fly by, and they can smell them because a virgin queen emits a particular pheromone. And they'll go out and try to mate with the virgin queens. And the virgin queen, and it's for their undoing. I mean, they'll perpetuate the species, but they die in the act. And the queen will mate with about 20 or so different drones and then return to the hive. About 80% of the time. Sometimes the queen doesn't come back and she'll get picked off by a bird, and then that gives the beekeeper fits and maybe he has to go buy a queen. So here's a perfect deep frame of sealed brood. So this is all worker brood. So they're all capped except around the edges. So around the edges, the honeycomb will have honey in it up in the corners and pollen. So bees live on pollen and honey. The nurse bees eat this and they secrete royal jelly and they give it to everybody else. You can see a couple little imperfections in the comb here. The bees have made a little extra down below. Usually this is for drone comb. And drone comb has a useful purpose of its own, and I'll talk to that in a minute. But this is a real nice frame. Just a few missing larvae. And as they develop, the nurse bees, if they don't think they're going to develop, the nurse bees will pull the larvae out and consume them and recycle the protein. So what do you think these lines are of empty brood in the deep frame? I just told you that they like to fill them all in, but here we see these two particular strange lines. Well, what those are is shown in this slide. This is an undrawn wired beeswax foundation in a super frame. So this is a smaller frame for a super. And they're made out of wood, and the foundation comes pre-made. It's in a beeswax pattern. It's made, it's made out of beeswax in a hexagon pattern that's embossed into it. And it comes with vertical wires for stability, because ultimately you will be centrifuging this frame to extract the honey. And when I put this frame together, I put in these horizontal lines of wire. And sometimes with the new foundation, when the bees draw out the wax and make this all honeycomb, the queen or the nurse bees or somebody doesn't like that line of wire that's at the bottom of the cell. And they tend not to develop brood in those cells. So you can sometimes see on a new frame wires and empty cells within a honeycomb. After a couple of times of brood being raised in an entire frame, that fills in with the cocoons of the bees after they undergo metamorphosis. Another thing to look at here is this grid. This is a queen excluder. So we use a queen excluder to keep the queen from laying eggs in the supers, in the honey supers. So we want the queens down low in 2 brood boxes, and we want the honey supers up above, and we want the queen to just stay down below in the brood box, not go into the honey supers, because if she escapes and goes up into the honey super and lays eggs in between the honey cells, then it's just a big mess. So here's a couple other frames. On the left, this is free comb. So freely drawn comb starts when the beekeeper puts a very thin band, half-inch band of honeycomb right at the top underneath this bar, underneath this wooden bar. So just tell the bees, this is where I want the honeycomb to be put, and they will draw wax. They use secreted wax from their wax glands in their abdomen, and they will draw this frame. So this is freestyle frame. Their cells may be a little bit larger than the commercial type, and we use the freely drawn honeycomb for comb honey. So on a good comb, if this was all full, I could get maybe 4 sections that are 4x4 cut out for comb honey. My bees are a little uncooperative here. They haven't filled this in. They started to make funny looking additions here. I'm giving them more time. I'm hoping for a complete coverage, but sometimes I don't get it. This is another kind of comb. This is drone comb. So drone comb, like I said, the drones take 24 days to develop. Why do we want all the drone comb together? Well, the Varroa mite, which is a vicious pest introduced from Asia back in the 80s, is the main reason why hives fail. And you have to address the Varroa mite. There are a number of chemicals to use to address the Varroa. I use oxalic acid as a treatment. Oxalic acid is the gritty stuff that's in rhubarb and spinach. It's also wood bleach. So you can take oxalic acid and put it in a little hot pan called a vaporizer, and you let the fumes go up through the hive, and the oxalic acid comes out onto the wood surface. The bees rub it. It gets on the mites. The mites, it irritates the mites' feet, which are like suction cups, and they fall off and they drop to the bottom of the hive. The hive has a screened bottom board, so the mites can fall through. And if you put a sticky board underneath, you can catch the mites and count how many you have after a treatment. So because the drone has a lifespan of 24 days, the female mite seeks out drone comb to lay its eggs. So the female mite goes into the drone larva and starts laying eggs in there. Its larva hatch, and if you have drone comb and see that this is green, it has a bigger template for a cell size. So the template for green drone comb is larger than the bees would normally make, and it's larger than the foundation that I showed you before. Because the cells get drawn out to be larger, the queen says, that's where I'm going to put drones. So she lays an unfertilized egg in every single one of these cells. So this frame is almost completely drone comb. So the mite is in there, and all the mite babies are in there, and they're all developing along with the bee larva. And the astute beekeeper with biological control will take this frame out when it's all capped and then freeze it. So I'll freeze it for at least 24 hours, and then I'll take it back and put it back into the hive. I can scrape the cappings off a little bit to allow them easier access. They'll throw out a lot of the drones, the dead drones and the mites, and recycle some of the protein. But there's an excellent method of biological control of the Varroa mite. Okay, this is a queen cell. So I showed you drone brood in that frame. This is worker brood right here. And at the bottom of this frame, there are 2 queen cells. This queen cell, and by the way, these queen cells are very large and elongated because I showed you the size of the queen. So it has to be very big to accommodate a queen's development. These workers are pulling a queen out of its queen cell. And the reason that they are doing that, the most likely reason, is because this queen hatched first. You can see the little cap. There's a little dome. The dome covered the bottom of this queen cell, and the queen cut herself out and ran around. And what did she do first? She immediately killed all her sister queens that were developing at the same time. So when a colony needs a new queen, it may make a dozen different queen cells. And they chirp to each other during development and trash talk probably. And the first one out usually kills all the others and becomes the sole virgin queen in the colony. And then she'll fly off and get mated after about 2 weeks. But anyway, that's what's happened here. A virgin queen came out and probably killed this one. And the worker bees are taking care of the business, cleaning it up. So this is a newly hatched queen on a honey frame. So she's away from her queen cells. She's now up in a honey frame. You can see pollen stored in the cells. This is capped honey. It's slightly different looking than capped brood. But this virgin queen is just walking around the hive, just looking at things. I know she's a virgin because her wings aren't quite dark enough yet, and her body is not dark enough yet. So they'll darken up to more of a tan color. So this one is the winner in that hive. Okay, how do we take care of bees? So these are some of the tools of the trade. This is a smoker, and in that smoker I burn sumac. Sumac is the best for generating smoke in a smoker. The smoke is used to disorient the bees. It doesn't calm them down. It makes them think it's a forest fire. So they immediately run back into the hive, dive down and start filling up on honey because they think if the hive burns, I'm going to start a new hive and I'm going to fly away with this honey as food to start a new hive. That's how you distract the bees. The next most important is a hive tool. This is for scraping wax and propolis off of the hives. Propolis is a resin that bees obtain from plants, and they use it to seal up any cracks in the hive. It's also very antibacterial and therapeutic for people too. So you can buy propolis tincture. So these are a couple of hive tools. You always need more than one. This is a frame hanger for hanging on the side of the woodenware, and then you can hang frames across here. So it's always good to have room when you go through the hive and pull frames and look for things like how much honey do I have? How much brood do I have? Do I have any brood? Is the queen still there? This is a mouse guard to keep the mice out of the hive, and it's all on carpet. And this carpet foils the small hive beetles. So I never had small hive beetles. That's another pest from Asia. It's about the size of a little smaller than a ladybug, but it infests hives and the larvae make a wreck. They chew up pollen especially, and they slime the whole place. If you let them get out of hand, it can really ruin your day. So carpet underneath the hives or around the hives prevents the small hive beetle larvae from developing in the soil. And anyway, that's what I use. I've just had them last year. I hadn't had them at all until last year. So last year was a bad time for small hive beetles. You can also have small hive beetle traps, and I have them in my hives as well. So this is a typical apiary in June, I think. And I said there's a lot going on here. So this is a typical configuration in the summer. This hive is sitting on a hive stand on a bottom board that has a screened bottom that you can't see. This is the hive entrance, but I also have these other entrances that I've drilled for easy access. And up here I've shimmed the super with a couple of cedar shims, and here I've pulled this super forward so the bees have extra access. Up here is a hive that has 3 deeps. I know what I've done here. The population was getting out of control, so in order to give the bees more space, I added a 3rd deep up at the top for extra space, so the queen is running around through all 3 of these, raising brood. And I put 3 supers on top to take care of all the extra honey and give the bees space. Over here, here's a deep sitting way up on the top above 2 deeps that have 3 supers. Well, what in the world is going on here? Because of the newspaper, I know that this hive has lost its queen, and I am now putting on another queen that I obtained from one of these small nuke boxes. And I'm putting another queen up here and introducing her to this hive. So sometimes, even though for this particular cypress hive that year, it lost its queen and was the queen, it made a new queen, a supersedure queen. The virgin queen went out but never came back. And after a month or so, there was no queen in the hive, and the workers decided to lay eggs in there. So now I have the worst of all things, laying workers, and they are indiscriminate. They lay eggs all over the place inside the hive. This is bad because they think they're in control. They don't want to accept a new queen. The workers are unfertile, so they only lay drone comb, and it just gets to be a mess. So here I've put in a new queen that I obtained from one of these Nucleus hives as a backup, and she's going to be introduced slowly through the newspaper. The bees will recognize it on both sides. They'll chew away the newspaper, and gradually her scent will infiltrate the colony. And when her scent infiltrates the colony, it's hoped that the workers down here will recognize that there's a real queen there, and they will stop laying, and she will be successful, and they will let her live. And ultimately, this was successful. After a couple more weeks, I just moved this entire box to the bottom, and I scraped all the drone comb out of these other 2 boxes, reduced the size to 1, and kept 3 supers on, and it finally worked. But there's always a lot going on in a bee yard. So this is normal hive activity. It may look like there's a lot of bees on the outside, but this is normal. The bees are coming and going, and they're putting honey up above, and they're raising brood down below. Now, what about this hive? It's a very big hive. Do I have a swarm going on here? Swarms happen when hives run out of space. So here I have so much hardware because I've done a procedure called a demery. And a demery means it's named after a man named Demery, who said that if you take the queen and capture her and put her in the bottom, and then put a spacer box, and then the rest of the colony up above, she'll be content to raise frames down here. And what the beekeeper does is take open brood from down below and put it up above, and take sealed brood from up above and put it down below. The sealed brood will hatch. The queen will have more space to lay eggs, and the new nurse bees will take over this bottom box. And then you have supers on the top for honey. But I thought maybe this hive was swarming because they ran out of space. Well, this is at 5:22, and later on at 5:36, we see less bees out here. So this cluster has gone in, this cluster has gotten smaller, and around the landing board, they are consolidated and they're going in. So what this tells me is, nope, they were just hot. They were just hot that day because I hadn't learned to stagger the boxes. So if you stagger the boxes, you can get a lot more ventilation. So this one is a potential swarm. Even after a demery procedure, there's just so many bees out here. And this hive did eventually swarm. But it had so many bees that I only lost half of them, or not even half of them. And this hive quickly recovered because it had when a hive swarms, they always leave queen cells behind. So just as a virgin queen hatched, this queen took off. So and it had so many bees, I didn't really miss any honey production with this hive. So this is a nice configuration for ventilation. So here's a deep with the second deep pulled back. And the bees are using this space to enter the hive, not so many on the landing board. Only had one super here, the super is pushed forward. So again, this deep got pushed back for ventilation, this super got pushed forward for ventilation, the top super got pushed back for ventilation. The outer cover has a shim behind it, so allow a lot of air in there. So when the bees are making a lot of honey, you want them to be able to evaporate the honey quickly. And you want good ventilation. So it's not a problem even if it rains. In the summer, the bees like water. They need a lot of water. So these are mason jars in what's called Boardman feeders. They don't have sucrose solution in them to feed the bees. They just have water to cool the bees off. So I always like to give them water during the summer. This is a nucleus hive that is cooling itself off. There's too many bees in here. And actually what happened was the next day I took this hive apart and put it over here and in a new configuration. So ventilated for the summer, water in the Boardman feeders, and this nuke is running out of space. Time for the beekeeper to move it. So why do I do all this? Well, here's the sweet reward, making honey from the frames. So the honey is extracted in a centrifuge device, a honey extractor. It just spins the frames and the honey comes out this honey gate. It goes through two stainless steel sieves. I open up the cells on the honeycomb with a spiked roller. This is like a paint roller, but it has spikes. And the spikes perforate the face of the comb honey. And then when you put it in the centrifuge, it all comes flying out. Later on, the beekeeper can use this pail of honey with a honey gate. You can open this up on a hinged doorway here and bottle the honey. And this is what the finished product looks like. I like to take my honey throughout the season. And I bottle it in a 1 pound classic jar or an embossed Muth jar. It's kind of like an apothecary jar with a cork. This is a 12-ounce skep jar. A skep is the old-time device that was made out of straw or coiled rope for beekeepers to keep hives. And this is an 8-ounce jar. This 8-ounce jar has black locust honey in it. I know because it's so pale. Black locust is our best producer. Most honey comes from trees, by the way. And black locust is a tree. It has beautiful, sweet-smelling umbels of white flowers. I'm sure there's a number of them around the Hershey Mill area. And later on with the season, this will be maybe June honey. It picks up a more amber color from clover and orchard trees. Later on in August, it'll start to taste more caramel-like. It's just the different plants that the bees are exposed to during the season. And finally, in this skep jar, this would be August honey. And I know this particular jar has smoky, molasses, and chocolatey coffee flavors, very complex. So they can go from very pure to very complex throughout the season. And that's the way I like to do it. How about supporting other pollinators? If you don't want to keep bees at Hershey's Mill, you can support other pollinators by making a pollinator board. This is one that the Chester County Beekeepers Association made. It's mostly holes drilled in wood or tubes. On the right is a mason bee nest that I've made in a coffee can. This is just a plastic coffee can stuffed full of Phragmites reeds. You thought Phragmites reeds were just a pest? Well, you can cut them and put them into a coffee can, and they'll be a suitable home for mason bees. Mason bees, you can see the mud that the mason bees slapped all around here. They'll make mud in my brick wall as well. If they find little holes, they'll lay an egg and block it up. But in these tubes, they'll go all the way in and lay an egg, wall it up, back off, lay another egg, wall it off until it's all full. So you can either hang them loosely or put them in a coffee can and support your other pollinators. Here's a picture of the Ccba Pollinator Board at the Cheslin Preserve. We erected this in honor of Peter Lintner. He was a Chester County beekeeper and a member of our club for years and years. And he passed away. He loved bees. He loved taking pictures of bees. So we made this pollinator board in his honor and had it installed at the Cheslin Preserve. It's fun to look at bees every place you go. I try to take pictures of bees where I see them. Here's one in the Grand Canyon, way down low. This bee is on mesquite. Here's another bee at a different locale on arrowweed. Here's one from the Caribbean on Roatan Island off of Honduras, as a star lily. And here's one close at home at Longwood Gardens on a peony. You can see the big pollen basket that this bee has accumulated on the peony, very rich in pollen. And over in Europe, there's a lot of linden. And here's Prague on the linden blossom. How about these bees? Why is this bee different? Why does he have that mark on him? I didn't put it there. I only put paint on my queens. But this bee is a worker bee that found its way into jewelweed. So it gets this little skunk pattern from pollinating jewelweed. So the jewelweed, the anthers are above the throat of the flower. So when the bee sticks its proboscis in to get nectar, pollen gets dumped on it from the top. So it's very distinctive. When you have a hive that's collecting jewelweed in the fall, you'll see all these little skunk bees. I just found that interesting. And then we have exotics. Have you ever seen this bee around? This is a giant resin bee, and it's on a BB tree. This is my BB tree in Downingtown. This bee came in from Asia to North Carolina in the 90s, and it's made it now to Downingtown in 2020. So this bee may be troublesome. It eats carpenter bees, and it uses their tunnel. And it doesn't kill the carpenter bee soon. It takes resin, it makes resin from plants, and it sticks the resin all over the carpenter bees and makes them die a slow death, and then uses their tunnel. These are males, and this is a picture of a blown up male, but it's really the size of the female. So the female is about twice the size of the male, and it's more, the female is more yellow. So if you see that, it's not a murder hornet. It might just be a giant resin bee. So again, other pollinators, and there's 400 or 500 different kinds of bees around. So be kind to your pollinators, and thank you, Hershey Mill Nature Group. Keep humming and supporting our pollinators. And I'll take any questions now. Oh, there's contact information. If anybody wants to get in contact with me to ask a question about beekeeping, you can email me at paulglysko@gmail.com, and that's my telephone number.
So can you get honey from the bees in the wintertime too?
No, they need it. They need to eat it all winter long.
Okay.
So I get them ready for the winter by making sure that the hive weight is at least 100 pounds. So you can physically weigh the hive and determine if you need to keep feeding. So sometimes in the fall, there's not a good honey flow, or sometimes the beekeeper will want to take the fall honey because it has a particular flavor that they like. In the fall, we get goldenrod and asters as the main honey crop. Sometimes Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed is a good honey producer. It makes a dark red honey, and that's in the fall. But oftentimes in Pennsylvania, we have what's called a dearth, and the plants don't produce enough nectar and pollen. So the beekeeper has to supplement with sugar syrup. So we make a solution, sugar syrup that's like 2 to 1, 2 parts sugar, 1 part water. Mix that up and put it in big reservoirs on top of a hive. And the bees will clean that out in a couple of days and store it in the honeycomb. So they'll store it in that sucrose honey is great stuff. It'll get them through the winter. I start collecting honey right about now. So I have some supers that are about ready to take. And then it'll go all summer long until maybe August. I'll stop at the end of August.
How often do you take the honey out?
Sometimes it's every week. I remember a couple years ago, I took 110 pounds on May 22nd. And then a week later, on May 29th, I took 140 pounds.
Wow.
They produced 4 hives, produced 140 pounds
Eileen, she's totally white.
of honey in a week. And that was during the
Eileen Racker.
locust flow.
Hey, Don.
So that was during the black locust flow. And when the black locust flow is going, if you have a hive scale, you can really see the hive weight increasing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a mason bee house in my garden.
Uh-huh.
Nothing ever happened. It's been there for a year, almost 2 years.
Well,
So
they never found it?
I don't think so, because my question to you is, once they use it, can it be reused again?
Oh, sure.
But
Yeah,
they never found it. I've had it.
The larva will hatch, and then it'll all open up. Those bees will run out, get mated, and then come back in and fill the whole thing up.
Okay.
So in my locale, I think they only last about a month, April and May.
Okay, because they've never found it, never used it. So,
Well, I think if you just keep it in a protected area and
well, I think it is. But a question, are you the one that has the beehives in our gardens here in Hershey Mill?
no,
Oh, no. No, because it's amazing how complex this whole thing is.
can be.
Yeah. But
Well,
no, it's
The last
very,
I checked, I didn't think anybody was working those hives. I
well,
thought,
I was told that the guy that does it sells it at the East Goshen Township.
oh, okay.
It's the Tavio that has them, the Tavio.
And does he sell them at the East Goshen?
Yes,
Yes, very
yes.
nice. Eileen, I just wanted to see, this is the first time I've seen you in a long time. Mike told me you have white hair. You have white hair.
Yes, I know that. And sorry for the interruption, everyone.
No, but that's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So,
Any other questions?